by contributing to the John Lothian News GoFundMe campaign to support the Markets Wiki Education history-focused video series, and more.
Too often today, when traders need help the most, their call is met with numbers to press on the phone instead of an actual person.
Advantage prioritizes you.
Personalized service, competitive pricing, aimed at giving you every advantage.
Make us your advantage.
Advantage Futures.
It was paper and pencil until the turn of the century, really. I mean, listen, they started to introduce the idea of handheld technology and handheld computers in the late 1990s, but those are just people testing them and using them for, beta tests and all that stuff. It hadn't gone full blown yet. But what started out as pen to paper in decimals and eighths of a dollar, converted to sixteenths of a dollar, like around 1990. Late 98, early 99, because we were preparing for the turn of the century, where after the turn of the century, we were going to go to decimals, but there had to be a transition, right? So we were from eighths to sixteenths and then sixteenths to decimals over a period of time. When they went to sixteenths right away on everything, but after the turn of the century, when technology did not fail, remember that whole Y2K conversation about technology, then the push was on for the industry to now move forward with the modernization. And so the next step was to decimalize pricing and decimalize how stocks traded. Now, they couldn't decimalize them all at once because you couldn't take, the 5,000 stocks that traded between NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange, and on Monday trade them in fractions, on Tuesday convert them to decimals, because they were in a decimal environment, there's 100 price points, right? In a fractional environment, when it was sixteenths of a dollar, there were 15 price points. And when there were eighths of a dollar, there was 7 price points, right? Because there was an eighth, a quarter, 3 eighths, 5 a quarter, 7 eighths, that was it. In sixteenths, it was a teeny, 2 teenies, 3 teenies, 4 teenies, up to 15 teenies. When it was decimals, it was a penny, 2 pennies, 3 pennies, 4 pennies, all the way up to 99 cents, right? And so the messaging meaning orders coming in, orders coming out, the bids, they were going to be flickering, right? Because people are going to be changing the bids and offers so quickly, is that they had to convert the markets into decimals over a period of 6 months. And so what they did was we took stocks A through D and we converted those all to decimals. And so those stocks, any stock that began with A through D, traded, in decimals, but the rest of the alphabet traded in fractions. And so it was really interesting when I think back about it now, it was really amazing because you ran into, Abbott Laboratories, and that's trading in decimals, and all of a sudden there's 100 price points to trade, and some guy's bidding a penny and some guy's offering a 3 cents, and but then you walked over to IBM and that's still trading, a teenies, 2 teenies, or 3 teenies, 5 teenies, or you know what I mean? So you had to change the way you thought depending on what stock you were going in. And there were times where I was in stocks that traded in decimals, stocks that traded in pennies. Decimals and fractions, right? And so when I think back about it now, it was really an amazing moment in time to go through that transition. And then once we completely converted to decimals and everything was trading in decimals, that's when they handed you the handheld computer, which, is not like an iPad. It's not an iPad, but it looks like an iPad. Today, it's about this size, right? Then it was a little bit clunkier. It was much thicker. It was heavy. The battery was connected. The battery wasn't even built into the handheld. The battery had a wire connected to it, and it hung off your belt. You attached the battery to your belt. And the battery only lasted 45 minutes, which was really amazing because then at the time, 45 minutes, this thing lasts for a long time. But if you weren't paying attention and you were busy and all of a sudden 45 minutes came and, you had a battery meter on your handheld, you could tell when your battery was going to lose power, and you had to run over to the ramp to change your battery. It was like, it was like in the NASCAR, right? Where they pull in and they change all the tires and then they run right out again. That's what it was like. You'd run in, they'd plug your handheld into the power source. They take out the battery, they put a battery in, and you'd run away again, right? And It was really amazing. But the other was the technology when it first came out. It was touchscreen, right? But the touchscreen technology was for shit. You'd go to A, you'd hit a B. You'd go to hit 2 cents, you hit 5 cents. I mean, it was clunky at best to describe it. Yet at the time you were using it, even though it was clunky, you thought, wow, this is like really 21st century. But meanwhile, it was in retrospect, that was like a Model T considering what there is today in terms of the way the technology, the handheld technology works today, and the algorithms that the handheld supports today, because then all it did was receive orders and send order flow back, right? Now it executes, the handheld does so much today, and the touchscreen technology is just fantastic. In terms of how it responds to the touch and all that stuff. So, going through that technological change was really, it was amazing. I mean, like now I sit here and a big smile comes to my face because it was so exciting to have been there at that moment in history, to kind of bring the country through that, be there as the markets became, this modern 21st century amazing place. And it took time, right? That didn't just happen from Monday to Tuesday. It happened over time. But you had to listen. There were guys who were 60 years old at the turn of the century when that was happening, who they handed them a handheld computer, and these guys said, "Nah, screw it, I'm out," and they retired because they said, "Fuck it, they're not gonna at 60 years old learn how to work this handheld computer." So the headset started much earlier because remember we used to have. They were cell phones, but they were like internal cell phones. You couldn't dial outside. It's like an intercom system. So I could be standing in the crowd, and if you were my clerk in the booth, I could call you on the phone and say to you, "Hey, John, call Joe and tell him there's 3 buyers out here that he's competing with. There's nothing for sale, but up $0.25, I can buy 25,000, something like that, right?" And I wouldn't have to leave the crowd. I could talk to you right from the crowd. So first it started with the phone, and then they said, "Well, we'll just create a headset. We'll plug the headset into the phone. Now you don't have to actually hold the phone. You can just hit the button. It'll dial you, and now I can just start talking to you on the headset." So that happened like in the late 80s, actually, that the headsets and all that stuff started to happen, and then everybody was wearing the latest, the greatest, and all that stuff. And it helped in the efficiency of the markets, right? It helped for sure. And then the internal phones, these big industrial, if you remember those big industrial phones, became much more sleek. And then they were the BT 21st century phones, and you could conference people in, and you could connect people to talk. I could be standing out in the crowd, and I called you, and you could connect me directly to the customer, and I could speak to the customer right from the crowd. At the time it was happening, it was fascinating, but now I look back on it and I think about, like anything, how clunky it was. And I'm sure today, 20 years from now, they're going to look at me and they're going to say, "Oh, wow, look how clunky this was, this Zoom thing. It was so clunky," right? I was running the for Solomon Brothers, and I get the phone call from the head trader who said to me, "You need to do nothing today except stand in," whatever the stock was. So say it was Emerson Electric. "You just need to stand in the stock today because we're going to be buying an awful lot of it, and you cannot move from the crowd." That was like the greatest day because I had like this unlimited buy order. I mean, it was unlimited. And what ended up happening was it was a busy day, and there was news out in the stock, and there was a big crowd. There were times when there were 15 people screaming and yelling, and everyone trying to bid and offer. And I just had this buy order. It was just buy the stock, right? And so I'd go in there and I'd wait, blah blah, and suddenly I'd go, "Take them," and I'd start screaming at people. They'd make offers. I'd take yours. I'd start taking names that would create, this whole ruckus in the crowd. And everyone else, it was unbelievable. Then I'd walk away because I could, right? Because I had this unlimited buy order. I could be much more selective. So then I'd go in there, and I'd take stock, I'd do all that stuff, and I'd walk away for a little bit. I'd let it settle down. I'd go back in, right? Get the crowd all riled up again. Just bought stock. And I had one of my clerks that just sat right on the outside of the post where I was. And every time I was writing down names, I was handing the paper. And they'd run back to the booth with the name, write the reports with the names. And that went on the whole day. I stood in that stock and did nothing but buy stock. That was like one of the greatest days, like in terms of being in a stock, right? But there were also like September 17th, 2001 was an amazing moment in time too, was the day that the market opened after 9/11, right? The event happened on the Tuesday, the 11th, and then we opened the following Monday. And that day was a tremendously emotional day for a range of reasons, obviously, but it was an exciting day because here we were right at the core of the country. When you think about capitalism, you think about the U.S., you think about the United States stock market, you think about everything it represents. As an American, you think about what that means to you and to the country and to people around the world, right? Investors around the world. And so that was just an incredible moment in time. That day, that morning, that opening, that during the day, what it felt like, it felt so fragile. But at 4 o'clock, when the day ended and the market ended down, the market on the 17th ended down 500 points or something, which was a huge move in the Dow in 01. 1.9 billion shares or some number that today is, today we trade 12 billion shares with your eyes shut. Then it was like, trade, because we did it all we were still doing it, even though we had just gone electronic, there was still so many people down there and they were still doing it, partly open outcry, partly not. But at 4 o'clock when the bell rang and the market closed and it didn't fail that day, after a lot of people thought the market was never going to make it, technology was going to fail. And it didn't. It became a really emotional, powerful moment because it was like everyone, the bell rang at 9:30 and everybody held their breath and they ran around all day almost holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. And then when it didn't happen, but the market closed and we'd lost 500 points and on 1.9 billion, and the bell rang, and you could, as ugly as that day was financially, you could almost feel like the whole country was standing right there with you. And that, when you stand up and you lock arms and you just stand up and you had this unbelievable sense of patriotism and how proud it was to be an American, and you stood up, and I'll never forget it. It became emotional. You saw men just crying, right? Because it was the tension that was everybody was holding. And then it was like, okay, you son of a bitch, you knocked us down for 6 days. Yep, you did. But now we stood up and now we're coming to get you. And that's what that moment was like. And it was the most powerful, incredible moment of my career. I can feel it as I can feel my body feels exactly the way it felt. I can feel it right now, the way I felt as I'm telling you that story. You used a calculator, and because listen, remember there was no computers on the floor. There wasn't any LinkedIn, no Twitter, no Excel spreadsheets, none of that shit on the floor that you had access to. And so everything you did it by your brain, and you did it with a calculator, and you figured it out, and you did the math really quick. You had the clerk in the booth. He said, okay, this much volume traded so far. We need to have this much of the order done. We'd figure out, okay, buy 5,000 more or sell 20,000 more in order to catch up with volume, that kind of a thing. But it was all done. It was all done in your head and with pen and paper. You relied on your clerk to help you out, right? He was keeping track, or she was keeping track. You were keeping track. Right. Yeah. I had a little pad in my pocket. I had a pad that I would, keep track of where I was, the time, the volume, to make sure that I was, if I wanted to be done with half the order by 11 o'clock, I had to make sure I was with half the order by 11 o'clock, right? Yeah. But you didn't want to just blow it all out at 10 minutes to 11. You wanted to spread it out over time. You wanted to get a range of prices. You kind of want to be represented, right? But you did it all. I mean, it's unbelievable. You did it all mentally. Today it just happens in a computer. I mean, it's like, and they break it down into 100 share lots and 50 lots, right? 50 meaning 50 shares at a time. Then you were doing it, 1,000 share lots or 5,000 share lots, or depending on the stock, a 10,000 share lot, whatever it was, right? But you did it all. You had to do it all mentally. I laugh when I say that because they couldn't do it today, because the computer does it all. Like your brain goes mush. I was more a bull because I was young and I had nothing really to lose, right? because my life was just starting. I was just starting to accumulate assets. Like I said, we had gotten married. I bought a house, so I didn't have a lot of money in the market because I'd used all the money I had to put a down payment on my house and to buy a car, and I had my kid and all that shit. So when I was able to start to put money into the market, I always remained much more of a bull than a bear because I was young and I knew I had time on my side. Right. And I would say that to anybody today, too. If you're 30 years old or 35 years old, you've got so much time on your side. I'm 60. You and I'm on the back nine. I could live another 30 years. You're right. I could. My grandmother lived till she was 103. But I could live another 30 years, which is partly why I'm not retiring yet, because the idea of sitting around for 30 years and doing nothing. And as much as I love the beach and the ocean and fishing and sailing and boating, I'm not just doing that for the next 30 years. And so, so I remain very much a bull. I remain a bull on America, a bull on the market, but I've learned a lot, like you. I've learned a lot. I know when it's time to get a little bit more cautious and when it's time not to. But that's part of what we do, right? We educate, we bring people. Now in this role I have as not only the chief market strategist, but as the wealth advisor for this independent $1 billion RIA, I get to talk to clients and people about my experience, and they're younger than me, and mentoring them through, right? It was amazing. We had our own tailor too. It was amazing to be a member of the exchange. And when you went out and you met people, if you went out to dinner and someone said, "What do you do?" and you say you remember the New York Stock Exchange, it was like people were in awe of you, right? They were like, "Oh my God, what's that like?" And listen, it's true for anyone that came to New York, right? Whether you were a foreigner or you came from California or Texas, whatever, people that came to New York wanted to go to the New York Stock Exchange. They had to see it. They had to feel it. And remember, there was a time prior to 9/11 that the exchange had a visitors gallery, and anybody off the street could walk up there. They didn't have to buy a ticket. It was free. You just walked that line, you went up, and you stood behind the glass wall, and you looked down over the main room, and you saw all the guys running around, and you saw the action, and you could pick up a phone, and there was a recording telling you what was going on and all that stuff. But then post 9/11, they shut that down. You can't do that anymore. The exchange is no longer you just can't see it anymore because they can't take the risk, right? Can't take the risk of some wacko going in there with a knapsack, going to blow the place up. Just can't. So in my mind, it's really a tremendous loss for the nation and for the country, because in my opinion, the New York Stock Exchange is a national treasure. Every American should feel part. They like the New York Stock Exchange and capitalism should just be a part of everybody's fabric, right? I mean, it is a national treasure. There's no place else in the world that is like the New York Stock Exchange. No place. One of the greatest things was, and you could never get away with half the stuff today that you could then, just because everything is politically incorrect. But you might come to work, and so say you went out last night and you got really wasted, you got drunk, you came to work, you're hungover, you feel like shit, blah, blah, blah. But the day gets started, you have to work. And it might get slow during the day for me. Meanwhile, you're busy, blah, blah, blah. And we used to have these metal plates, right? And you used to bring the metal plate, and you'd be in a crowd, and I'd come up and I'd sneak up behind you, and then you'd drop the metal plates, and the metal plates would hit the floor. And when they hit the floor, it made this big racket. You'd jump, and everybody would laugh because everybody could see it coming, right? And you'd throw, everything would go up in the air. You'd start screaming and yelling. It was a way that you broke kind of the tension, right? You broke the tension. When visitors would come to the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, they used to take baby powder. You probably remember this, right? And they would sneak up, and one of the brokers would get down and they'd put baby powder on the tip of the guy's shoes. And then all of a sudden, everyone would start screaming, "It's snowing in New York!" And they'd start banging their feet in the ground. And the guy would look around like this, and he'd look down at his shoes, and all of a sudden he'd see this powder on his shoe. And his first reaction naturally is to lift your foot and bang it so you get the powder off your shoe. And I know, like it sounds stupid to anybody listening, but I have to tell you something. They were some of the greatest moments because they were tension breakers. They were, and they were just part of that was the personality thing. That was the 5,000 personalities that were down there that just gave the place its life. And while it sounds ridiculous today when you were doing it at the moment, we would just roar in laughter because it was the same reaction. Everybody had the same reaction, pounding their feet in the floor to try to get the powder off. It was classic. And it was just the things we did to, especially on days when it was really tense, or if somebody was really, if somebody was really uptight one day, they would break his balls. Oh my God. But it was part of the boys club, right? But it was the camaraderie that everybody had. I mean, it was really, when push came to shove and somebody had a tough moment or somebody had a losing trade or whatever, the way the community would come together and give this guy extra business so that he could make it up, right? Everybody shared in everybody's experiences. We were very generous in terms of supporting charities. We had the members Handicapped Children's Fund, which was a charity that was started way back in I think it was back in the 30s, that would support handicapped children, right? Because now the name of the organization was the Members Handicapped Children Fund, because I think the guy who started it was well before me, had a handicapped child and had come to New York Stock Exchange, and they started this foundation on behalf of helping this guy with his handicapped child, which then grew into the Members Handicapped Children's Fund, and so that we would raise money every year and then donate it out at the end of the year. Or there were we were very charitable, like one year my brother had gotten diagnosed with lymphoma, and one year I was raising money for Leukemia Lymphoma Society, and I was shaving my head live on CNN television, and Dick Grasso came down and he did the honors. He shaved my head and did the whole the shaving cream and the shaver, and he shaved my head, and they filmed the whole thing. But then I ended up raising 60 grand like this, because that's how generous people were, right? And we always pulled together, right? When somebody was in need, the place came together, whether it was a medical need, right? There were great connections to all the hospitals in the city. And, God forbid somebody gets sick, go talk to Kenny, or go talk to Joe, or go talk to Billy, because he's got the connection for you at the right hospital. The fondest memories were how the floor came together to rally. Yes, because I became a floor official, and then I became a governor of the New York Stock Exchange. So before the place went public, because once it went public, all those committees ceased to exist, right? Because the committees all existed when the exchange was the private institution, and the exchange went public when John Thain took it public with that reverse merger with Arca in April of 2006, I believe. But prior to that, there were all the exchange committees. So I was on the allocation committee, which was when a new company made an application to come listed on the New York Stock Exchange, they had to be assigned a specialist unit. And so the specialist units would apply, they would interview them, and then the allocation committee would sit down and go over all the results of the interviews, as well as what specialist unit was putting who forward, what are the stocks that he trade, all that kind of stuff. I was also a member of they called it the FACTS program, which was a program that taught government officials, the SEC, educators, people in the industry about not only the New York Stock Exchange, but about the market structure process, how the exchange actually operated. I was a member of the Market Performance Committee, which was how well the specialists in the system performed in the broad market under times of stress, under times of buoyant markets and difficult markets, and so I was very involved. The exchange, under Dick Grasso's rule, made it very clear to CNBC at the time that there were a lot of very colorful personalities on the floor, and that she could not walk around just go talking to anybody, because it was television, and even though I didn't work for the exchange, I worked on the exchange, and something I said or did would reflect either good or bad on the exchange. And so Dick Grasso was very very specific about people who were allowed to talk to the media. And so he would go around and he'd handpick. Now, at this point, I was already very involved in the institution in terms of my committee memberships and all that stuff. And I had my own business at the time. It was very successful. I was a governor of the exchange. And so right after 9/11, they came over to me and other people. Dick Grasso had kind of handpicked a half a dozen people that he thought would do a good job. And so they said would you be interested in being able to talk to the media? Hello, duh, of course I would. And so they put you through some media training because, the one thing that was initially difficult is when you're standing on the floor of the exchange and you've got this earpiece in your ear and you're looking into a camera that's mounted on a post right above you, and you're trying to talk to somebody who you can't see. You're hearing them, but you have to look into the camera, and you know what I mean? So that takes a little bit of getting used to, number one, and then doing it in the middle of the day when there's all this commotion going on. So you had to be someone that was confident and that certainly understood and that could relay the message.
Advantage Futures is proud to sponsor this JLN video series. In many of the series videos, there are recurring themes of people being helped at critical times in their trading careers. Too often today, when traders need help the most, their call is met with numbers to press on the phone instead of an actual person. At Advantage, you are our priority. Everyone needs an edge or advantage when trading. Make us your advantage.
John Lothian News would like to thank those individuals who have contributed to our Markets Wiki Education GoFundMe campaign. Their financial assistance allows us to produce and distribute videos like this for our Open Outcry Traders History Project or the Path to Electronic Trading video series. Join them in supporting John Lothian News, capturing the history of our industry.